Before you arrest me, Officer Mercer, you may want to see whose name is on that file. Judge Evelyn Brooks spoke without raising her voice, even as red and blue lights swept across the limestone steps of the Rivergate County Courthouse. A cardboard records box had tipped onto the pavement beside her, spilling sealed court files into the cold morning wind. Pages slid across the steps beneath the carved promise above the entrance: equal justice under law. Officer Daniel Mercer did not look up at those words. He did not look at the gold court seal stamped across the folders. He looked only at Evelyn, a black woman in a charcoal gray suit, standing beside an unmarked sedan with one hand resting on the roof. To him, her calmness was not proof of innocence. It was defiance. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered. Evelyn's hands had never left his sight. Her leather briefcase remained closed near her feet, and her courthouse identification rested inside the outer pocket, exactly where she had told him it was. But Mercer had stopped listening several minutes earlier. He believed he already understood the scene: a suspicious woman, restricted documents, and an explanation that sounded too polished to be true. The conclusion had come first. Everything else was being forced to fit around it. A gust of wind lifted one folder and carried it several feet across the pavement. It landed face up, near Mercer's polished boot. Printed across the cover were the words "Officer Daniel Mercer, Professional Conduct Review." Below that title was a signature written in steady blue ink: Honorable Evelyn Brooks, Supervising Judge. Evelyn saw it. So did a young law student standing near the courthouse doors, his phone held motionless at chest level. Mercer did not. He stepped forward, pinning the corner of the folder beneath his shoe as though it were nothing more than loose paper. "You expect me to believe these belong to you?" he asked. His voice carried across the entrance plaza, drawing the attention of clerks, attorneys, and families waiting to enter the building. Some slowed down. Others stopped completely. No one spoke. Evelyn studied Mercer's face, not with fear, but with the careful attention of someone memorizing testimony. "I told you where they came from," she said. "My chambers." Mercer gave a humorless laugh. "Sure they did." The courthouse doors opened behind them, and Court Clerk Megan Walsh stepped outside. The moment she recognized Evelyn, the color drained from her face. "Officer," Megan called, moving quickly down the steps, "you need to stop and verify her identity." Mercer raised one hand without turning around. "Stay back, ma'am. This is an active investigation." Megan froze. Evelyn's eyes remained on the folder beneath his boot. Her name was inches from him. The truth was not hidden. It was not locked away or waiting for some dramatic confession. It was lying in plain sight, stamped with the authority of the court, while the man wearing a badge chose not to see it. "Officer Mercer," Evelyn said, her voice quieter now, "you have been given 3 opportunities to follow procedure." He reached for his radio, then changed his mind. "Turn around." A hush moved through the crowd. Evelyn slowly faced the patrol car, the courthouse reflected in its dark window. Somewhere above the entrance, a security camera continued recording. Somewhere inside the spilled records, a small evidence microphone continued listening. And beneath Mercer's boot rested the file that could decide whether he would ever wear that badge again. 37 minutes earlier, Evelyn Brooks had stood alone in her chambers while pale morning lights stretched across the polished oak floor. The courthouse had not yet filled with attorneys, clerks, defendants, and families carrying the weight of decisions that could change their lives. For a few quiet moments, the building belonged only to the hum of the heating system, the distant roll of a janitor's cart, and the soft turning of pages beneath Evelyn's hands. On her desk rested 3 sealed folders and a thick records box prepared for a confidential review. Each file documented a separate arrest. Different streets, different dates, different citizens. Yet the language inside the reports felt disturbingly familiar. Suspect appeared evasive. Subject failed to cooperate. Camera unavailable because of technical error. In every case, the person arrested was black. In several of them, the reporting officer was Daniel Mercer. Evelyn did not allow anger to make conclusions for her. She had learned long ago that justice weakened when emotion replaced evidence, even when that emotion was understandable. She read every statement twice, compared timestamps, marked inconsistencies, and wrote questions in the margins with steady blue ink. Her responsibility was not to protect the police department or punish it. Her responsibility was to find the truth and make certain the law applied equally to everyone standing beneath it. A framed photograph sat beside her lamp. It showed Evelyn at 11 years old, wearing a white Sunday dress and holding the hand of her father, Samuel Brooks. He had been a public school history teacher with a patient voice and a habit of carrying peppermints in his coat pocket. Months after that photograph was taken, he had been detained outside a grocery store because someone claimed he matched a vague description. He was released without charges, but Evelyn never forgot the way he returned home that evening. He had smiled for her. He had said everything was fine, yet his hands trembled as he removed his watch. That was the first time she understood that humiliation could follow an innocent person home. Years later, when she entered law school, Samuel gave her one piece of advice. He told her never to become so impressed by authority that she stopped questioning how it was used. Evelyn looked at his photograph now, then closed the final folder. Captain Laura Bennett had requested the review after discovering a pattern of complaints that had remained unresolved for months. The meeting scheduled for later that morning would determine whether the evidence justified a formal investigation. Evelyn had already made one thing clear. No officer would be condemned by rumor, and no citizen would be ignored because challenging a badge was inconvenient. She placed the folders inside the records box, removed her judicial robe, and hung it carefully behind the door. Without it, she looked like any other professional woman leaving a government office in a charcoal suit and low black shoes. That was exactly how she preferred to move through the building. Titles often changed the way people behaved. She wanted to see who they were when they believed no one important was watching. As she lifted the box, her telephone rang once and stopped. No message appeared. Evelyn glanced at the screen, then toward the quiet hallway outside her chambers. Someone already knew the files were moving. The confidential review room was located 2 floors below Evelyn's chambers, beyond a narrow hallway lined with portraits of judges whose names had outlived the people they once sentenced. Evelyn carried the records box past each frame without slowing, though the missed telephone call remained in her thoughts. The courthouse was waking around her now. Elevator bells sounded. Shoes crossed marble floors. A clerk hurried by with a stack of motions pressed against her chest. Everything appeared ordinary, yet Evelyn had spent too many years studying human behavior to dismiss the feeling that someone was watching the movement of those files. Captain Laura Bennett was already waiting when Evelyn entered the secure conference room. She stood beside a long walnut table, dressed in a dark police uniform with no jacket, her silver captain bars catching the fluorescent light. Laura had served in Rivergate for 22 years and had earned a reputation for refusing easy answers, especially when those answers protected the department from embarrassment. She closed the door behind Evelyn and checked the electronic lock twice. "No one else knows we moved the meeting forward," Laura said. Evelyn placed the box on the table. "Someone knows the records left my office." Laura's expression tightened. "What happened?" "A call that ended before I answered. No message. No number." Laura looked toward the covered window in the door. "That could be nothing." "It could," Evelyn replied. "But we are not here because nothing happened." They opened the first folder. Inside were photographs, dispatch logs, written complaints, and partial recordings recovered from courthouse security systems. The complaints stretched across 11 months. A college student detained. While waiting for a rideshare. A nurse questioned outside the apartment building where she lived. A father stopped while carrying groceries home to his children. Each person had been released without charges. Each report described the same pattern of suspicion. Each official explanation used language so similar that entire sentences appeared copied from one file to another. Laura placed 3 reports side by side. "Read the 3rd paragraph." Evelyn did. In every report, the officer claimed the subject became increasingly uncooperative after being asked a routine question. The punctuation was identical. Even the same word had been misspelled. Evelyn turned to the signature line. "Daniel Mercer." Laura opened a separate envelope and removed a body camera maintenance log. His camera failed during 6 encounters in 9 months. Technical services found no hardware problem. Evelyn studied the dates. Were the failures reported before or after the complaints were filed? After. The room seemed quieter then. Not silent, but careful, as though even the walls understood the weight of what had just been said. Evelyn looked at Mercer's photograph clipped to the personnel summary. He wore a practice smile, the kind designed for official ceremonies and recruitment posters. There were commendations in his file. There were also warnings that had never progressed beyond internal conversations. Has he been notified of this review? Evelyn asked. No. Chief Hayes agreed we needed independent verification first. Evelyn closed the folder. Good. We will not accuse him before the evidence is complete. Laura watched her for a moment. You still think this may be careless reporting? I think the law requires us to prove what we believe. Evelyn placed one hand on the box. But if he used his authority to target people he assumed no one would defend, then this review cannot end with one officer. We will have to ask who signed his reports, who ignored the complaints, and who benefited from the silence. Outside the room, a shadow paused beneath the narrow strip of frosted glass. Neither woman saw it. A moment later, soft footsteps moved away down the hall. Laura gathered the folders and sealed them again. The archive scanner is ready across the courtyard. Once these are copied, no one can make them disappear. Evelyn lifted the box. Then we move them now. As they opened the door, a courthouse administrator standing near the elevator lowered his eyes and pretended to study his telephone. His name was Charles Vance, and before Evelyn reached the ground floor, he had already placed a call that would turn suspicion into a weapon. Charles Vance waited until the elevator doors closed before he stepped into an empty records alcove and made the call. His voice was controlled, almost bored, the way a man speaks when he wants panic to sound like routine. He told dispatch that a black woman in a gray suit had removed sealed court files without authorization and was heading toward the east parking area. He said she might try to place them inside an unmarked vehicle. He did not mention Evelyn's name. He did not mention that she was a judge. He gave just enough detail to make the accusation sound credible and just little enough detail to let prejudice complete the picture. 3 blocks away, Officer Daniel Mercer heard the call through his cruiser radio. He had been parked beside a coffee shop, finishing the last of a paper cup gone cold. The dispatcher repeated the description. Female, black, approximately 40 to 50 years old, gray business suit, carrying a box of restricted records. Mercer placed the cup in the holder and answered before the dispatcher finished asking for available units. He knew the courthouse. He knew the East Lot. More importantly, he knew the tone of a call that promised an easy arrest. The accusation arrived, already shaped for him. All he had to do was believe it. Back inside the courthouse, Evelyn and Laura reached the ground floor. Laura stopped near the security desk when her telephone vibrated. A message from Chief Robert Hayes requested an immediate update on an unrelated personnel matter. She looked toward the courtyard doors, then back at Evelyn. I need 5 minutes, she said. Take the files to the archive entrance. I will meet you there. Evelyn nodded. Do not discuss the review in the hallway. I was about to tell you the same thing. Laura turned toward the administrative offices while Evelyn continued alone. The records box was heavier than it looked, nearly 20 pounds of statements, logs, and sealed reports. She carried it with both hands, moving past the public entrance where visitors stood beneath the slow rhythm of metal detectors and fluorescent lights. Above them, the words equal justice under law had been carved into stone decades earlier. Evelyn had passed beneath those words thousands of times. That morning, they felt less like a promise and more like a question. Outside, the air was sharp and bright. A steady breeze moved between the courthouse columns and lifted the edge of her jacket. The archive building stood across the east courtyard, less than 100 yards away. Her unmarked sedan was parked beside the walkway because she planned to return to Chambers after the transfer. She had covered half the distance when a police cruiser turned into the lot faster than necessary and stopped across her path. Mercer stepped out before the engine fully settled. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, and carried himself with the impatient confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed before he explained himself. His eyes moved from Evelyn's face to the records box, then to the sedan behind her. He did not look toward the courthouse entrance. He did not ask whether anyone inside could verify her identity. Set the box down, he said. Evelyn stopped. May I ask why? Because I told you to. His answer came too quickly. She studied the nameplate above his badge. Daniel Mercer. The same name she had read in 6 camera failure reports less than 10 minutes earlier. These are sealed court records, she said. I am transporting them to the archive scanner. Mercer glanced at the box and gave a thin smile. That is a serious claim. It is not a claim. Evelyn shifted the weight carefully but did not lower it onto the pavement. You may contact the clerk's office or Captain Bennett. Mercer took one step closer. People who steal government property usually have a story ready. The words hung between them. Not loud. Not yet. But clear enough to reveal the conclusion he had already chosen. Evelyn felt the old memory of her father return, not as fear, but as warning. Authority could make a mistake. Pride could turn that mistake into a decision. Officer Mercer, she said, calm and precise. What specific facts support your suspicion? His expression hardened. Put the files down. Evelyn looked past him toward the courthouse doors. Megan Walsh had just stepped outside and was staring across the courtyard. Behind the glass, Charles Vance stood perfectly still. Then Mercer reached for his radio, and Evelyn understood that the false report had not found him by accident. Mercer pressed the radio button but did not request verification. Instead, he announced that he had located the suspected individual and was beginning an investigation. His choice of words mattered. Suspected individual, not courthouse employee, not unidentified woman carrying sealed records. In less than 10 seconds, he had transformed a vague report into certainty, and certainty into authority. Evelyn lowered the box carefully onto the hood of her sedan. You now have the files in plain view, she said. Read the court seal, contact the clerk, and confirm my identity. Mercer looked at the seal but made no effort to examine it. Identification. It is in the outside pocket of my briefcase. Then reach for it slowly. Evelyn kept both hands visible. I will retrieve it after you acknowledge that I am not under arrest. His eyes narrowed. You do not set the conditions here. The breeze moved through the courtyard again, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the low murmur of people gathering near the courthouse steps. Megan Walsh was walking toward them now, her pace quick but measured. Behind her, two attorneys had stopped beside the entrance. A man waiting for a hearing lifted his telephone and began recording. Mercer noticed the growing audience, and something in his posture changed. He became louder, straighter, more determined not to appear uncertain. Step away from the vehicle, he ordered. Evelyn complied, moving 2 feet to her left. Now open the box. These records are sealed. That sounds convenient. It is a legal restriction, not a convenience. Mercer gave a short laugh. People like you always know exactly what to say. The sentence landed with more weight than its volume. Evelyn had heard versions of it in courtrooms, depositions, and whispered conversations outside elevators. People like you. A phrase designed to accuse without explaining the accusation. Megan reached the edge of the parking area. Officer Mercer, please stop. She is authorized to carry those files. Mercer turned just enough to face her. Return to the building. I am the court clerk assigned to those records. Then you can answer questions after I secure the evidence. Evelyn watched Megan's expression shift from confusion to alarm. Mercer had been given another path toward the truth. He rejected it because accepting help would require admitting that his first assumption might have been wrong. Officer, Evelyn said, state the reason you believe a crime occurred. Mercer pointed toward the box. A caller reported stolen documents. You match the description, and you are standing beside an unmarked car. The description was a black woman in a gray suit. That is correct. That description could fit hundreds of women in this county. His jaw tightened. Are you accusing me of discrimination? I am asking you to explain your reasoning. The crowd grew quieter. Mercer looked toward the watching faces, then back at Evelyn. For a moment, doubt passed through his eyes. It was brief. Pride replaced it. He moved closer to the box and lifted the top folder despite Megan's warning that the contents were restricted. His gaze passed over the official seal, the case number, and the signature page. Then he saw his own name on the cover. Officer Daniel Mercer, Professional Conduct Review. The color in his face changed. What is this? He demanded. Evelyn held his stare. A file you were never supposed to see this way. Mercer looked toward the courthouse, where Charles Vance had disappeared from behind the glass. Then he looked back at Evelyn as if the evidence had become more dangerous than the person carrying it. Turn around, he said. This time, his voice was lower. You are being detained. The word detained changed the air around them. Mercer had not said arrested, because he knew the difference mattered. Detained gave him room to act before he had proof. It let him control the scene while pretending he was still searching for facts. Evelyn turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. Before you take another step, she said, activate your body camera and notify a supervisor. Mercer touched the center of his uniform. A small indicator light glowed beneath the fabric of his jacket, but he covered it with his hand. The camera is not working. Megan Walsh looked at him in disbelief. Officer, courthouse security is recording this entire area. Mercer ignored her. He lifted the records box from the hood and placed it on the pavement with less care than the sealed documents required. The top folder slid free and opened in the wind. Several pages lifted into the courtyard, skimming across the stone like white birds trying to escape. One sheet caught against the tire of the patrol car. Another landed near the feet of the law student recording from the steps. Evelyn watched every page because each one represented a person who had once stood where she was standing now, asking for an explanation and receiving only commands. Mercer reached for the briefcase. "Do not open that," Evelyn said. "It contains privileged court material. You lost the right to tell me what I can inspect. Rights are not rewards, Officer Mercer. You do not remove them because someone questions you." His expression hardened. The crowd had grown to nearly 20 people, and every new witness seemed to make him more determined to display control. He opened the outer pocket of the briefcase and removed Evelyn's identification wallet. For 1 second, the truth was in his hand. Her photograph, her full name, the seal of the Rivergate County Superior Court. He barely glanced at it before snapping it shut. This could be fake. Megan stepped forward. "It is not fake. She works here." Mercer raised his voice. "Stay back." A courthouse security guard appeared at the top of the steps, but hesitated when he saw a uniformed officer directing the scene. That hesitation was familiar to Evelyn. Institutions often failed not because no one recognized a wrong decision, but because everyone waited for someone else to challenge it first. "Call Chief Hayes," Megan said to the guard. "Call Captain Bennett now." Mercer moved between Evelyn and the courthouse entrance. "No one is calling anyone until I finish." His radio sounded at his shoulder. Dispatch requested a status update and asked whether the person had been identified. Mercer pressed the side button, then released it without answering. The radio sounded again. He turned the volume down. Evelyn noticed. So did the law student. So did the camera above the eastern doors. Mercer was not merely making mistakes anymore. He was choosing isolation. "You have the court identification," Evelyn said. "You have a clerk confirming my authority. You have access to dispatch, courthouse security, and your chain of command. What fact are you still trying to establish?" Mercer looked at the open folder bearing his name. Fear moved behind his eyes, hidden beneath anger. If the records were genuine, then the woman before him had seen the complaints. She had read the missing camera reports. She knew the language he repeated from arrest to arrest. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," he said. The courtyard fell silent. Evelyn did not move immediately. She looked toward the courthouse entrance, where the carved words above the columns remained bright in the morning sun. Then she looked back at Mercer. "You are creating the evidence you believed you could prevent," she said. Mercer removed the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked softly. That small sound carried farther than his voice. Evelyn turned, not in surrender, but with the composure of someone who understood that truth sometimes had to stand still long enough for power to expose itself. The handcuffs closed around Evelyn's wrists with a sound that pulled an old memory out of the deepest part of her mind. For one brief second, the courthouse courtyard disappeared. She was 11 years old again, standing beside the front window of her family's house, while her father walked up the driveway after being released without charge. Samuel Brooks had tried to smile. When he saw her watching, he had even lifted one hand as though nothing had happened. But when he entered the kitchen and removed his watch, his fingers trembled so badly that the metal slipped onto the table. Evelyn had never forgotten that sound. It was quieter than the handcuffs, yet it carried the same message. Someone had decided who he was before asking whether the decision was true. Now, decades later, she stood beneath the morning sun with her hands secured behind her while another officer treated certainty as evidence. The difference was that Evelyn understood every rule Mercer was breaking. She knew what he was required to document, what he was required to verify, and what he was required to explain before restricting a person's freedom. She also knew that none of that knowledge could protect someone when the person wearing the badge had already chosen not to listen. Mercer guided her toward the patrol car. He kept one hand near her elbow, more concerned with appearing in control than with the questions surrounding him. The crowd parted slowly. Faces turned toward Evelyn, some filled with shock, some with discomfort, and some with the practiced distance of people who had learned to observe injustice without stepping close enough to become involved. Megan Walsh followed several feet behind them. "Her identification is valid," she said. "You have been told that twice." Mercer did not turn around. "Return to the building. I am not leaving her alone with you." His radio sounded again. Dispatch asked whether a supervisor was needed. Mercer reached up and lowered the volume until the voice became a faint murmur. Evelyn heard it anyway. She measured her breathing, letting each breath slow the anger rising beneath her composure. This was the moment people misunderstood. Calm did not mean she felt no fear. Dignity did not mean humiliation caused no pain. She could feel the eyes on her back, the pressure of the metal around her wrists, and the familiar ache of being reduced to an assumption. But she would not let Mercer turn her emotion into an excuse for his behavior. When they reached the rear door of the cruiser, she stopped. Mercer looked at her. "Keep moving." Evelyn turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "How many people have you arrested this way when no judge was watching?" The question was not loud, but it traveled across the courtyard. The law student lowered his telephone slightly. Megan stopped walking. Even the courthouse security guard seemed to hold his breath. Mercer's expression changed, not because he understood who she was, but because the question reached the place he had been trying to protect. "I said keep moving," he replied. "You had my identification. You had a court clerk. You had dispatch asking for confirmation. You had every opportunity to verify the truth." Evelyn looked toward the scattered files near the sedan. "And you chose the one answer that gave you the most power." Mercer opened the cruiser door. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had become fragile, held together by the presence of the uniform and the audience he no longer controlled. Behind them, one of the loose pages lifted in the wind and turned over on the pavement. At the bottom was Evelyn's signature. Above it was a recommendation requiring Daniel Mercer to appear before the supervising judge for formal review. Megan moved before Mercer could close the cruiser door. "Officer Mercer, this has gone far enough." Her voice was steady, but the urgency beneath it made several people near the courthouse steps turn toward her. Mercer faced her with one hand still on the door. "You are interfering with an active detention. I am confirming that the woman you detained is authorized to possess those records." "You already said that. And you ignored me." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to witnesses who had begun to understand exactly what they were seeing. The law student raised his telephone again. The courthouse security guard stepped down from the entrance and spoke quietly into his radio. Mercer noticed both movements. "Everyone needs to back away," he ordered. Evelyn remained beside the open cruiser door, her hands secured behind her, her posture upright. "You are isolating the scene because every available source contradicts you," she said. Mercer looked at her as if her calmness were another offense. "Get into the vehicle. Not until you explain where you intend to take sealed judicial records." The question stopped him. For the first time, he seemed to realize that the files presented a problem he could not solve by simply removing Evelyn from public view. If he left them scattered in the courtyard, he abandoned evidence. If he placed them in his cruiser, he took possession of privileged material. If he returned them, he admitted that Megan's warning had merit. Every path required him to acknowledge facts he had refused to examine. Inside the courthouse, the eastern doors closed as security staff restricted public access to the courtyard. The heavy glass sealed with a low mechanical sound, and several people behind it pressed closer to watch. Among them stood Charles Vance. He held his telephone near his chest, his face pale beneath the bright lobby lights. He had expected Mercer to take the box quickly and leave. He had not expected cameras, witnesses, or Evelyn's refusal to panic. When Megan glanced toward the doors, Vance stepped away from the glass. At that same moment, Captain Laura Bennett was leaving the administrative wing when her telephone vibrated with an automated alert. The small evidence microphone inside the records box had activated when the files were moved outside the secure review room. Laura stopped in the hallway and listened through one earbud. Mercer's voice came through first, then Megan's, then Evelyn's question about the sealed records. Laura turned immediately toward the main stairs. 2 floors above, Chief Robert Hayes heard dispatch request Mercer's status for the third time. The lack of response troubled him. He asked for the officer's location, then heard the answer. East Courthouse parking area, possible theft of judicial documents, 1 woman detained. Hayes looked through the window of his conference room and saw the flashing lights below. Who authorized the detention? He asked. Dispatch could not answer. He left the room without collecting his coat. Back in the courtyard, Mercer finally pressed his radio. One female in custody. Possible theft of restricted files. Dispatch asked for her name. Mercer looked at Evelyn but did not answer. Dispatch repeated the question. Megan stepped closer. Her name is Evelyn Brooks. The radio went silent for half a second. Then a different voice came through, sharp and unmistakable. Officer Mercer, do not move that vehicle. Mercer stared at the radio. It was Chief Hayes. Across the courtyard, the courthouse doors opened again. Captain Bennett emerged first, moving quickly toward the records scattered across the stone. Behind her, Chief Hayes came down the steps with his eyes fixed on Evelyn. Mercer followed their gaze and saw something he had ignored from the beginning. No one was looking at Evelyn like a suspect. They were looking at her like the person in charge. Chief Hayes reached the cruiser first, but he did not speak to Mercer. His attention went directly to Evelyn, then to the handcuffs around her wrists, then to the sealed records scattered across the courtyard. Captain Bennett moved beside the open box and began gathering the pages without disturbing their order. When she found the folder marked with Mercer's name, she stopped. Who opened this? She asked. Mercer straightened. I was investigating a reported theft. Laura looked at him. Who reported it? Dispatch received an anonymous call. And what did you verify before placing her in custody? Mercer glanced toward Evelyn, then toward the crowd. She matched the description. Hayes finally turned to him. What description? A black woman in a gray suit carrying court files. The answer sounded weaker when spoken aloud. It contained no height, no vehicle plate, no direction of travel, and no identifying feature beyond race, clothing, and the records Evelyn was authorized to carry. Laura removed her telephone and contacted dispatch. Preserve the original emergency call, the incoming number, and the complete radio log. Nothing is to be altered. Mercer shifted his weight. Captain, I had reasonable grounds. You had a report, Laura replied. Grounds require verification. Inside the courthouse, James Holloway had already begun reviewing security footage from the administrative hallway. He watched Evelyn and Laura leave the confidential room with the records box. Less than a minute later, Charles Vance appeared near the elevator, checked both directions, and entered the records alcove. The camera had no audio, but it captured the telephone in his hand and the exact time of the call. James compared the timestamp with the dispatch log. The difference was 11 seconds. He sent the footage to Laura. Her telephone vibrated while Mercer was still explaining that the situation had developed quickly. She opened the video and watched it once. Then again, her eyes lifted toward the courthouse doors. Charles Vance was no longer standing behind the glass. Chief, she said quietly, we may have identified the caller. Hayes studied the screen. His expression changed from concern to something colder. Lock the administrative exits. Do not alarm the public. Megan Walsh heard him and looked toward the building. Charles was near the elevator when Judge Brooks left the review room. Mercer caught the title, but the full meaning had not yet settled. Judge, he repeated. No one answered him. Laura contacted courthouse security and gave Vance's description. Within moments, a guard reported seeing him enter the underground service corridor with a leather document case. The corridor led to the employee garage and an exit on Madison Avenue. Hayes ordered officers to meet him there, but Evelyn spoke before he could leave. Chief, preserve his office and electronic access first. If he made the report to stop these records from being copied, he may have already tried to remove something else. Hayes nodded immediately and changed the order. Mercer stared at Evelyn. She was still handcuffed beside his cruiser, yet everyone around her was following her instructions. The realization came slowly, then all at once. The woman he had treated as a suspect understood the investigation better than anyone present because it was hers. Laura stepped closer to Mercer. Your body camera indicator is active. His hand moved instinctively toward his chest. I thought it had failed. It did not. The microphone inside the records box was also still transmitting, and every command, refusal, and unanswered request had been preserved. Mercer looked toward the folder beneath his boot, then at the courthouse where security officers were sealing the exits. What he had believed was a simple detention was now connected to a false emergency call, confidential records, and a man attempting to flee. Evelyn held his gaze. You were not sent here to discover a crime. she said. You were sent here to help conceal one.